Government funding runs out on Sunday, and Congress still has no deal. For a closer look at the economic implications of a government shutdown, we want to bring in Romina Boccia. She is a Cato Institute Director and Budget of Entitlement Policy. Also, Michael Linden, who is former OMB Executive Associate Director in the Biden administration. He's now a Senior Policy Fellow with the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. Michael, why don't we start with you, because you were actually in the room just a few months ago when you were still at the OMB when they were doing these negotiations for the debt ceiling. That worked out. We had a deal. What do you think of what you see at this point?
You know, it's a good question, and thanks so much for having me this morning. As you said, I was in the room a few months ago when we were negotiating the debt limit deal, and at that time, we were all agreed that part of the purpose of that deal was to make it so that the appropriations process could proceed normally and we would avoid a government shutdown. I think we all want to avoid a shutdown. Shutdowns are bad. I think we can all agree about that. And the challenge that we have right now is that one faction in one chamber, in one party, is trying to hijack that process. And unfortunately, the speaker is allowing that. The solution is pretty simple, though. That's the good news, is there's a bipartisan majority in both chambers, frankly, to keep the government open. They just need to put that to a simple vote, and we can, put this behind us, and Congress can get to work executing that deal that everybody agreed to just a few months ago.
Speaker McCarthy has expressed quite a bit of frustration himself. I heard some more comments that he made last night going through with some of this. Look, the issue is that if he brings that vote to the floor, they're going to try and oust him. That's, at this point, some of those 5 to 10 members are really trying to get pushy with this. Like, how do you deal with that? And by the way, if they are successful in ousting him, you are then dealing with a speaker who has even less power probably than McCarthy, because he's completely beholden to that group of people.
I think there are people better qualified than me to talk about the internal politics of the House Republican caucus. I will just say that, the speaker successfully convinced 150 of his members to vote for the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Some of these same members of his that are threatening to shut down the government were not happy with that deal. They're still not happy with that deal, but they didn't vote to oust him after that deal. And I think the speaker should put the American people's interests first above the interests of a few small minority of his own members, and keep the government open, or else there will be consequences for ordinary people, for the economy, for the budget. And I think that the speaker knows that. I think he's trying to wait until the very last minute, but hopefully he'll come to his senses and put a clean CR to vote.
Romina, what are the consequences of the government shutdown at this point? It's not the same as a debt default, which has a much bigger implication if you're not paying off treasuries and beyond. But what are the implications of a government shutdown?
It all depends on the length of the government shutdown, because the longer it goes on, the more severe the economic implications likely will be. I think that a short-lived government shutdown will cause a blip in the economy. We also saw in earlier shutdowns back in 2019, that one was a smaller partial shutdown, but the economy continued to roar because this was after the tax cuts and we had very low unemployment just before the pandemic. It won't be a huge factor. I would like to disagree with Michael and say I place blame on both sides. I have not yet seen a clean CR that honors the fiscal commitments made in the debt limit deal, not from the House and not from the Senate. Everything I've seen is full of emergency spending, other gimmicks, and additional supplemental funding that was not agreed to in the debt limit deal. So I just want to say that I wouldn't place all this blame on the Republican side. They do have some legitimate grievances here.
We were just talking with someone about the bond picture and what's going to happen to interest rates from here, what's going to happen with the issuance that the United States has to continue with those treasuries. It's going to get a lot more expensive if there aren't buyers who are willing to step up. Romina, what do you think just about the situation we're in and where interest rates might head?
Yeah, I think the much bigger issue is not this likely temporary government shutdown, but the fact that the U.S. government is borrowing increasing amounts of money as interest rates are rising. We are beginning to enter a so-called debt doom loop where government borrowing drives up interest rates, and trying to pay those that interest continues to contribute to higher interest rates. And what we're seeing in Washington is political dysfunction, not just to deal with funding the government, but to address the much bigger issues that are driving us down this debt crisis, which are unsustainable spending on major health care and pension entitlements, Social Security and Medicare in particular here, which are responsible for 95% of unfunded obligations. And I think there, the Speaker McCarthy has his pulse on the issue by saying what we need is a fiscal commission. Congress needs help here. These issues are bigger than our current governing institutions, especially with how polarized they are, can handle by themselves.
Michael?
You know, I think that to the extent that there are fiscal concerns, a government shutdown will exacerbate those concerns, not ameliorate them. It's exactly the wrong thing to do. But if you want to step back, I think we can all agree that there are fiscal risks associated with the current trajectory that the budget's on. They're not as big as my colleague just mentioned. There's a debate about how serious they are, but there are risks. And if you look back and say, why do we have larger deficits and debt today than we expected 20 or 30 years ago, the answer is actually entirely because of repeated tax cuts in the last 20 years, those that were mainly skewed to the wealthy and corporations. So if Republicans in the House were actually concerned about that, they would not be pushing for more tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations, and they would not be focusing their attention cutting things like education funding or clean drinking water funding. These are proposals that they actually have in their appropriations bills. And if they want to talk about, how to fund the government with an appropriate tax system that meets the needs of the kinds of obligations that the American people have repeatedly demanded of their government, things like Social Security and Medicare, those are bedrock principles that the American people support. And we need a tax system that would support that. But that's not what this conversation is about. That's not what a government shutdown is about. And the simple fact is that there's no need for a government shutdown here, and it wouldn't help in any respect.